So here we are, finishing up our discussion of the importance and power of the Roman Catholic Church in the Middle Ages. One of the most important things that happened during the Middle Ages is the so-called Great Schism between the Eastern Orthodox and Western Roman Catholic churches that happened in 1054 AD. This is prior to the First Crusade by about 55 years. The reasons for this are deep, and they go back to the foundation of the Byzantine Empire. We've already talked about the fact that the Pope had nobody overseeing him, no oversight from emperors, while the Patriarch in Constantinople, and of course the patriarchs of other places, were all appointed by emperors. So already there was disagreement between the two sides in how to appoint a high church official. They also disagreed greatly over the use of icons, or basically images, pictures, those kind of things, in church services. Eventually, those were resolved, as both sides, Eastern and Western, continued to use Christ, crosses, and images of saints in churches. But those arguments further divided the church when they were happening. They also disagreed over doctrine, like the Holy Spirit. The nature of the Holy Spirit was debated. The largest issue, though, was power. The Pope and Patriarch actually excommunicated each other at one point. This officially divided the church into two distinct branches: the Eastern Orthodox Church, that's capital was Constantinople, and it would dominate Eastern Europe, and the Roman Catholic Church, which would dominate Western Europe. This also solidified the cultural divide between the two, as one spoke Greek and the other spoke Latin. One had their Bible in Greek, the other had their Bible in Latin. The Roman Catholic Church conducted its services in Latin only, but in the East they used the language of the local people. In the Roman Catholic Church, the Pope has the authority over all other bishops, but in the Eastern Orthodox Church, the Patriarch rules as part of the group. Priests were expected to be celibate in the Roman Catholic doctrine, but could get married in the Orthodox faith. Also, there were differing opinions about divorce. In the Roman Catholic Church, it was just not permitted, supposedly ever, and in the Eastern Orthodox Church, it was allowed under certain circumstances. Modern day, since Pope Francis has been Pope, however, there has been much more communication between the two branches of Christianity. Here in this picture you see Patriarch Bartholomew and Pope Francis together. Since they began talks in 2013, there have been several joint statements that they've made together in the name of Christianity. As you know, even though there was a split, the emperor needed the help of the Pope to stop the advancement of the newly converted Muslim Turks. This led to the Crusades. You have already seen the background of the First Crusade, but there were more. The Crusades continued to happen. You don't have to memorize all of these crusades. However, you ought to know that they continued throughout the 1100s and 1200s. The second and third crusades were about keeping Jerusalem. The third one was pretty famous, as it contains the famous King Richard from the Robin Hood stories. Eventually, though, they lose Jerusalem and have to strike a deal with the Muslim leader, Salahuddin, to allow Christian pilgrimage protection. The fourth crusade was a debacle. The Christian crusaders had to go through Venice, who was going to give them transport across the sea, but they were charging a lot of money for that transport. So, Venice had them, for payment, attack a Catholic city called Zara. So Catholics attacking Catholics. Then they agreed to make a diversion to Constantinople in order to help a Byzantine emperor get his power back. They helped, but when he died, they didn't get paid, so they sacked Constantinople. Again, Christian versus Christian. This proves that often the Crusades weren't just about religion, but also about power and money, but mostly power. Of course, the rest of the Crusades were a mess. They tried to invade through Egypt and failed, ended up signing a treaty just to respect each other's sacred sites. The 7th, 8th, and 9th Crusades were all failures, and there was even the possibility that there was a children's crusade. If this story is true, in 1212, a 13-year-old boy approached the Pope, saying he was called by God to go on crusade with other children. The Pope agreed and sent, supposedly, thousands of children on a crusade ages 8 to 13. According to the legends, all of the children were either killed in storms or captured as slaves before ever reaching the Holy Land. Either way, this can show you just how unsuccessful overall the Crusades ended up being. They were more than just pitting Muslims against Christians. What else it did was actually revive a lot of trade between the East and West. You can see why that would be when you check these routes out, the routes the Crusaders took to get to Jerusalem. They reopened trade routes that had once been closed, igniting more economic action in Europe once again. The other thing that came as a result is the violence that became common against the Jewish population. The Jews became a target in the Middle Ages due to the fact that there's always a need for a scapegoat. First, the fact that the Jews were always a literate and educated group was huge. Also, they were wealthy as a population. The reasons for this were largely instituted by Christians, actually. First, Jews were only allowed to have certain jobs. They could not own land or be in public offices, so lords, knights, etc. were out. Also, Christians were not supposed to make money off of money, since it was considered to be unholy, which is basically the idea of interest. So, a lot of them became bankers. So the Jewish population fills the void. As bankers, merchants, physicians, lawyers, and other middle-class occupations, they weren't tied to land. This, though, did cause them to be blamed in economic downturns. Then, with the Crusades, rumors started flying that Jews were desecrating the Holy Communion, either by urinating in it or dumping out the wine. There were also rumors of sacrifice of Christian children, all of which were completely unfounded, but nobody cared about evidence. So what ended up happening were persecutions sanctioned by the new European kingdoms. That means they were allowed to happen by the kings. Jewish populations were slowly but surely pushed to becoming more marginalized in society during the next few hundred years. Eventually, there was a large group of them that ended up in Eastern Germany, Poland, and Russia, which makes sense when considering the locations targeted most during the Holocaust in World War II. Overall, the religious implications of the Middle Ages were huge. First, Christianity in general rose. Then Islam rose, causing conflict between the two. There was a clash over the use of icons. Conversion en masse to Islam and Christianity happened at the same time. The Eastern and Western churches split, the Crusades ripped through the Middle East, and the Jews became targets once again. Of course, it's not over. We have plenty more religious issues to talk about in the Middle Ages as we move forward in history, but the Middle Ages started a trend that will continue in Europe for hundreds of years, even into the modern era.